The brass swallow faced west, and Mrs. Alice Corbett knew at once that someone meant the night coach to fail. She stood beneath the torchlit arch of Woldham Park, with her father's brass map dividers open in one gloved hand and the disputed relay disc balanced in the other. Around her, servants hurried between polished lamps and steaming horses, while county families gathered beneath the stone arcade to witness the first departure of the new Woldham Night Coach. The air smelled of leather, damp gravel, hot metal, and the sharp sweetness of spilled lamp oil. Music drifted from the great hall behind them. No one else seemed to notice that the tiny stamped bird on the brass token pointed in the wrong direction. Alice turned the disc toward the light. The swallow's wings were clear. So was the square edge that should have been beveled. "Stop the departure," she said. The coachman had already gathered the reins. He glanced toward the steward rather than obeying her. Lady Araminta Breton, wrapped in silver-grey velvet, gave a soft laugh from beside the carriage steps. "Must the whole county wait because an innkeeper has taken offence at a bird?" Alice did not look at her. "The bird is the lock, the edge is the key. This one was made to enter backward, if it enters at all." Lord Satterley moved through the circle of trustees with the calm authority of a man accustomed to having doubt removed before it reached him. Reginald Breton, Earl of Satterley, was 57, silver at the temples, and elegant enough to make impatience resemble discipline. "Mrs. Corbett," he said, "the Woldham route has been inspected for 3 days. My trust officers have found no defect. Your officers inspected the road. I am inspecting the relay system, which was approved. The approved Marden disc carries an east-facing swallow and a beveled edge. This carries neither." Lady Mary Brackenbury leaned from the coach window. At 23, she had her brother's direct gaze and none of his practiced stillness. "Alice has never delayed a departure without reason." "She has never delayed one before half Sussex," Araminta replied. "Perhaps the audience has inspired her." A murmur moved through the guests. Alice felt it without turning. She had lived long enough among titled families to know how quickly competence became presumption when displayed by a woman who earned her own income. 4 years of widowhood had taught her something else. Silence was often praised as dignity by those who profited from it. She closed the map dividers with a quiet click and faced the coachman. "Do not move those horses." "Mrs. Corbett," the steward began, "His Grace has not ordered a delay." "Then find His Grace. You have found him." The voice came from behind her. Thomas Brackenbury, Duke of Woldham, descended the broad steps without haste, though the set of his shoulders told Alice he had already judged the urgency. He was 40, tall, dark-haired, and carried the restrained bearing of a man who had once commanded cavalry and had never entirely ceased measuring rooms for danger. Tonight he wore formal black, but rain had darkened one shoulder where he had crossed the open court without a cloak. His gaze went first to Alice, then to the disc in her hand. "Show me." She placed the brass token upon her palm. The genuine number 12 should enter the Woldham rack with the swallow facing east. Its lower edge should be beveled so it seats cleanly. This one faces west and has been filed square. Thomas took the lantern from a footman and held it lower. Could it be a workshop error? Not both errors together. A reversed stamp might be careless. A square edge might be careless. Together they make a disc that carries Marden's mark but is not meant to function correctly. "You are accusing someone of sabotage," Lord Satterley said. Alice looked at him at last. "I am describing the metal." Thomas turned the disc beneath the lantern. His thumb stopped at the rough edge. "Open the sealed rack." The steward hesitated. "Your Grace, the guests are waiting." "They may continue waiting." Reginald's expression did not alter, but something colder entered his eyes. "A public delay will damage confidence in the route." "A failed coach will damage it more," Thomas said. The steward brought the small iron rack from the route office. Its wax seal bore the Woldham mark and remained unbroken. Mr. Owen Sayer, the solicitor appointed to record the launch, stepped forward with paper already in hand. He was a spare, careful man whose habit of listening made careless people uneasy. He noted the seal, the time, and the names of those present. Thomas broke the wax before witnesses. 12 brass discs rested inside, each separated by a narrow groove. Alice pointed to number 12. "That is the genuine Marden token." The steward lifted it with tongs and laid it beside the first disc. The difference was visible even to those who had mocked her. The genuine swallow flew east. Its edge sloped cleanly. Thomas carried both tokens to the brass rack fixed beside the route ledger. Which first? The genuine. He held the lantern while Alice aligned number 12 with the slot. Her fingers brushed the damp wool at his sleeve. The contact lasted no more than a heartbeat, but awareness passed through her with unsettling clarity. Thomas's gaze lowered to her hand, then returned to the rack. He did not move closer. Alice inserted the genuine disc. It slid into place without resistance and released the relay latch with a clean metallic click. "And the other?" he asked. "Do not force it. We need its condition preserved." Thomas nodded to Mr. Sayer. "Record that the false disc has not been tested in the rack." Mr. Sayer did so. Alice wrapped the counterfeit in clean paper without touching its filed edge again. Thomas called the Woldham steward forward. "You will seal this separately and place it in the evidence cabinet. It remains at Woldham until Mr. Sayer records any transfer." The steward bowed. Mr. Sayer wrote the custody instruction beside the launch entry. The guests had fallen quiet. Araminta examined the ribbons at her wrist as though the matter no longer interested her. Reginald watched Alice with the attention of a man revising an estimate. Thomas handed the genuine No. 12 to the coachman. "Use this for the departure." "Your Grace," Alice said, "the coach should still be inspected. It has been inspected twice. Then inspect it a third time." A few men exchanged glances. Thomas did not. "What do you require?" "Coach box, route board bolts, lamp brackets, traces, brake chain, and the departure time entered before the horses move." He ordered each check. The coach box appeared empty except for tools, spare leather, and a folded route cloth. The black board on the coach side carried Marden Woldham in cream letters. Its bolts looked fixed under torchlight, though the outer paint was too fresh for Alice to see the lower layers beneath it. The traces were sound. The brake chain held. Mr. Sayer entered the time. Only then did Alice step away. Lady Mary settled back beneath her travelling rug. "Will you forgive us for leaving after all?" she called. "I will forgive the coach when it reaches Lark's Gate," Alice replied. Mary smiled. Thomas looked toward Alice as the guard lifted his horn. "You were right to stop it. I was right while stopping it. Cost your house only a delay." His gaze sharpened. "You think that is the limit of my trust?" "I think powerful men often admire a woman's judgment until accepting it becomes inconvenient." For a moment, the noise of the courtyard seemed to withdraw. Thomas did not answer quickly, and Alice respected him more for that than she would have respected an easy assurance. "Then I shall have to prove otherwise," he said. The horn sounded. The coach rolled beneath the arch, lamps swaying over the wet road. Hooves struck sparks from stone before settling into a steady rhythm beyond the gates. Guests began returning toward the warmth of the hall. The musicians resumed. Servants gathered cups and folded rugs, yet Alice remained beneath the arch, with her dividers closed in her hand, listening for the distant bell at Gossamer. The new route schedule allowed 12 minutes before the first signal. Thomas stayed beside her. Neither spoke. At 11 minutes, the wind carried only the fading music behind them. At 12, there was no bell. Thomas looked toward the black road. At 13, Alice opened her dividers. Again, though there was nothing on the courtyard map she had not already measured. A rider appeared beyond the gates at full speed, his horse dark with sweat and road mud. He pulled up so hard the groom nearest him caught the bridle. "Your Grace," he gasped, "the night coach is in the ditch beyond Gossamer Fork." The music stopped a second time. This time, no one complained about the delay. The rider had scarcely finished speaking before Thomas began issuing orders. "Wake Dr. Henshaw. Bring the estate wagon, blankets, lanterns, and 2 steady teams. Send a groom ahead. No one touches the coach or the signposts until I arrive." The courtyard, so recently arranged for celebration, broke into movement. Guests withdrew beneath the arcade. Servants ran for tack and medical cases. Lady Araminta stood beside her father, watching Alice rather than the black road. "Your Grace," Alice said, "I am coming." Thomas looked at the brass dividers in her hand. "The road will be rough. So is the question. You believe the sign arm was altered. A properly driven coach would not enter the quarry lane unless the road directed it there." Lord Satterley stepped forward. "Must Mrs. Corbett now direct the rescue as well?" Thomas did not look at him. "She understands the route better than anyone here." He ordered a closed carriage for Alice, Dr. Henshaw, and the head coachman, then turned to the steward. "The wrapped courtyard disc remains sealed in the Woldham evidence cabinet. Mr. Sayer is to record any hand that approaches it." "Yes, Your Grace." Alice entered the carriage. Thomas climbed in at the last moment, pulling the door shut as the wheels moved. Lantern light crossed his face with each turn. The composure he had worn before the guests was gone. Fear had tightened his mouth. "Lady Mary was seated on the left," he said. "Yes, near the route board. Yes. If the coach struck on that side, do not imagine the injury before Dr. Henshaw has seen her." Thomas met her gaze. For a moment he looked less like a duke than a brother trying to command uncertainty into silence. "You are right." The carriage struck a rut. Alice's leather case slid from her lap as Thomas reached to catch it. Both bent. Their shoulders met in the narrow space, firm enough that Alice felt his breath stop. Thomas released the case at once and leaned back, leaving the distance to her. "Forgive me." "There is nothing to forgive." She returned the case to her lap. The contact had been accidental, but awareness remained between them. The head coachman cleared his throat. "Gossamer Fork is half a mile ahead." Alice opened the dividers over the route map. "The lawful turn bears left by the toll oak. The quarry lane falls right and descends too sharply for a loaded stage." "Could the driver have mistaken it?" Thomas asked. "Not with the sign arm properly set." If the arm was turned, the coach would follow the wrong descent before he understood the ground had changed. Rain began against the glass. Lanterns soon appeared below among hedges and bare branches. The night coach rested at an angle in the ditch beyond the fork, one wheel raised, the horses already cut free and covered. No one lay upon the road. Alice released a breath. Thomas was out before the carriage fully stopped. He crossed the muddy verge to Lady Mary, who sat beneath canvas with a blanket around her shoulders. Her face was pale, but she was conscious. "Thomas," she said as he knelt, "I'm not broken. You're not qualified to decide. Neither are you." Dr. Henshaw examined her while Thomas stood close but did not interfere. A bruised left shoulder and a mild strain to the right ankle, the physician said. "No fracture that I can detect. She must not walk upon it tonight." Thomas closed his eyes for one heartbeat. The others? Shaken. 2 minor cuts, none seriously injured. Relief moved through the group without becoming celebration. The accident had been merciful. It had not been harmless. Alice turned toward the fork. The wooden sign arm that should have pointed left stood several inches toward the quarry lane. Mud covered its iron collar, but bright scratches cut through the paint. She raised a lantern without touching it. Fresh marks. The head coachman crouched at the base. Someone used a wrench. 2 bites on the east side. Thomas called the local constable forward. "No one touches this sign arm. Mark the ground and keep a man here until daylight." Alice followed the wheel tracks toward the ditch. The driver had tried to correct after entering the descent. The mud showed a hard pull left, then a broad slide where the road edge had softened. "He reacted as soon as he realized," she said. "He prevented a full overturn." Thomas looked toward the driver beneath a blanket. Then he saved lives. Near the coach, the guard held up the box key. "Your Grace, this was still locked when we reached them." Thomas looked at Alice. The box was inspected at Woldham. "It was. Then we open it before witnesses, Mr." Sayer arrived in the second estate carriage. With the steward. He recorded the condition of the lock and the names present. The guard opened the coach box. Inside lay the tools, spare leather and folded root cloth Alice had seen before departure. Beneath the cloth rested a second brass disc, stamped number 12. Alice did not touch it. Mr. Sayer lifted it with folded paper. The swallow faced west. Its edge was rough and square. Thomas stared at it, then toward Woldham. "The first false disc is still sealed at the house." "Yes, Mr." Sayer said. "I confirmed the cabinet before leaving." "Then this is another object," Alice said, "placed after inspection or concealed where the inspection did not reach." Lord Satterley's carriage arrived as she spoke. Reginald stepped down with Araminta behind him, or placed by someone who knew precisely what would be inspected, he said. A young Woldham groom shifted uneasily. Reginald noticed. "You saw Mrs. Corbett at the rack before departure. Did you not?" "I saw her inspect it alone for a few minutes, Your Grace," the groom said. Alice did not deny it. "I checked the numbering and hinge pressure. The rack was sealed afterward." Araminta's voice carried through the lantern light. "But you had access to the system, as did the trust office, the Woldham route staff, the brass supplier, and every person who received the committee copies," Alice replied. Reginald turned toward the trustees who had followed from the estate. "The route cannot remain under a private posting house arrangement. The Satterley Trust should assume temporary control at once." Thomas looked from the second counterfeit disc to the altered sign arm, then to his sister beneath the canvas. Alice saw how readily Reginald's offer could resemble order. "No transfer occurs tonight," Thomas said. "The damaged coach remains here under guard. The left side panel and its Marden route board are not to be removed. The coach box disc goes into Mr. Sayer's separate custody. The sign arm remains fixed and watched. No one searches Marden property, questions Mrs. Corbett's servants, or calls her dishonest without lawful authority." Araminta's expression cooled. "You still trust her?" Thomas's gaze moved to Alice. "I trust what she has shown me." Alice heard the boundary inside the answer. It was trust in evidence, while the evidence remained manageable, not yet trust in her. Reginald inclined his head. Then call your inquiry. By tomorrow, Lady Mary's injury will be known across Sussex. The county will expect someone to answer for it. Thomas turned to Mr. Sayer. At Woldham tomorrow afternoon, every object separately recorded, every witness heard. Alice looked at the false swallow beneath the lantern. One counterfeit had waited in the departure court. Another had travelled inside the coach. Someone had not merely planned for a mechanism to fail. Someone had planned for her name to be found beside the failure by 3 o'clock on the afternoon of October 17th. The breakfast room at Woldham Park no longer resembled a place intended for civilized meals. Maps covered the sideboard. Damp coats hung near the fire. A folded blanket remained upon one chair, where Lady Mary had rested before Dr. Henshaw ordered her upstairs. Mr. Owen Sayer sat at the long table with 4 separate entries before him, each written in a deliberate hand. The courtyard counterfeit disc remained sealed in the Woldham evidence cabinet under the steward's custody. The coach box counterfeit disc, recovered from the locked box at Gossamer, had been transferred to Mr. Sayer under signed receipt. The genuine Marden disc No. 12 rested in the Woldham rack after its lawful use at departure. The damaged coach and its left side panel, still bearing the Marden route board, remained guarded at Gossamer. Alice stood opposite Thomas, with her brass dividers laid beside her private route book. She had not slept, neither had he. Lord Satterley appeared untouched by fatigue. Reginald Bretton occupied the chair nearest the fire, while Lady Araminta sat beside him in dark blue silk, her gloved hands folded as though she had come to observe a performance whose ending she already knew. "We should begin with what is not disputed," Mr. Sayer said. Mrs. Corbett identified a false disc before departure. A second false disc was later found in the coach box. The road sign at Gossamer had been forcibly turned. Lady Mary suffered a bruised shoulder and a strained ankle, but no fracture. No person has yet established who placed either counterfeit object or altered the sign. "Then the danger lies in the system," Reginald replied. "A route designed and supplied by Marden has now produced 2 false Marden tokens and a coach in a ditch. A false mark does not become mine because it copies my swallow," Alice said. "That is precisely why a false mark is useful." Araminta tilted her head. Yet very few people knew which way the swallow should face. Every trustee who received the committee instructions knew. Every route clerk who handled the rack knew. The brass supplier knew. The Woldham route staff knew. "And you knew more than any of them," Reginald said. Alice met his gaze. "Yes, which is why I recognized the danger while the rest of you applauded the lamps." Thomas's mouth tightened, but he did not rebuke her. Mr. Sayer turned to the young groom who had been summoned from the stable. "State only what you saw." The groom swallowed. "Mrs. Corbett inspected the route rack alone before supper, sir, for several minutes." "Was the rack sealed when she left?" "Yes, sir. I watched the steward press the wax." "Did you see Mrs. Corbett place anything inside it?" "No, sir." "Did you see anyone else approach afterward?" "Only the steward and the men carrying the rack to the court." Reginald leaned back. "Access, expertise, and control. At the least, they establish that Mrs. Corbett's arrangements cannot continue without supervision." Alice looked toward Thomas. The first false disc was not inside the sealed rack. It was placed with the departure materials outside it. "Which you also inspected," Araminta said, "as did the coachman, steward, trust clerk, and 3 ostlers." Thomas rested both hands upon the table. What would you do now? Alice had expected accusation. The question was more dangerous because it sounded like respect. Suspend only the Woldham night departure. Preserve every object separately. Remove no board, bolt, or fitting from the damaged coach. Compare the 2 false discs only under witness. Ask every gatekeeper along the route for original timing records before anyone connected to Satterley reaches them. Reginald's eyes cooled. You accuse my trust. I accuse no one. I say whoever designed this relied upon the trust assuming authority before the evidence was examined. And while you conduct your private campaign, he replied, another coach may fail. No coach need move. No business survives by remaining still. Thomas looked from Alice to the trustees seated along the wall. The county will require a temporary operator. Then appoint one, without handing every disputed road record to the house that stands to gain, Alice said. Silence followed. It was not the silence of thought. It was the silence of men measuring whose embarrassment would cost them more. One trustee cleared his throat. The Satterley Trust already controls the adjoining gates. It would be the swiftest arrangement. Swiftest, Alice repeated. Thomas's gaze met hers. She saw the conflict before he spoke. Lady Mary was upstairs injured. His guests had carried the story into half Sussex. The Woldham name stood beside a failed coach. Reginald offered a structure ready to occupy the space fear had opened until the cause is established. Thomas said, operational control of the Woldham route will pass temporarily to the Satterley Trust. Alice felt no outward change in herself. Her spine remained straight. Her hands remained still beside the dividers. Only the room seemed to recede from her, as though the carpets, portraits, and polished table had drawn back to leave her alone with the sentence, you are transferring control to the trust whose officers received every route instruction, she said. Temporarily, before the evidence is compared, to prevent further danger. You can prevent departure without surrendering the route. The trustees will not accept paralysis. Then let them say so openly. Thomas's voice lowered. Alice, remain at Woldham tonight. Give Mr. Sayer the committee copies. Do not approach the other turnpike trustees or issue a public statement until we have examined the discs. There it was, not an accusation, not imprisonment, something quieter and more complete. He had taken her authority, then asked for her silence so the removal would appear orderly. My private Marden records are not committee property, she said. I have not asked for them. Not yet. Araminta shifted, perhaps expecting tears, anger, or a plea. Alice gave her none. She opened the leather folio and removed the duplicated route instructions issued for committee use. She placed them before Mr. Sayer. Then she closed the folio over her private ledgers and slipped the brass dividers into their fitted case. The committee copies are yours to examine, she said. My business records remain mine. Thomas came around the table. You do not need to leave. Alice looked at the man who had held a lantern steady while she proved the first disc false. He had believed her when belief delayed supper. Now, belief threatened his house, and he had chosen the comfort of a ready institution over the woman whose judgment had already saved them once. You chose wrong, Your Grace, she said quietly. No one moved. Even Reginald lost the faint satisfaction in his expression. Thomas looked as though the words had struck somewhere no title could protect. Alice, do not ask me to stay where my judgment is useful only until fear enters the room. She turned to Mr. Sayer. Mrs. Baird and I will leave within the hour. You may send written questions to Marden Posting House. I will answer any that do not require me to surrender private property or accuse an innocent person. I can arrange rooms for you elsewhere on the estate, Thomas said. I do not require another room. The roads are wet. They were wet last night when your coach departed. That ended the matter, Mrs. Baird met Alice in the entrance hall with cloak, travelling bag, and the grave silence of a woman who knew comfort would be an insult before dignity had finished its work. The post-chaise came beneath the portico as dusk settled over Woldham. Thomas followed them outside. He opened the carriage door and offered his hand. Alice looked at it. The same hand had held the lantern. It had ordered the false disc sealed. It had also signed away her authority before examining what the second disc could do. She stepped into the chaise without touching him. Mrs. Baird followed. Marden? The postilion asked. By the Petersfield Road, Alice said. The carriage moved. She did not look back until Woldham's lamps had narrowed between the trees. Thomas still stood beneath the portico, one hand lowered at his side. Inside the breakfast room, Mr. Sayer waited until the chaise had left the estate before opening the sealed case containing the coach-box disc. The steward, 2 trustees, and Thomas witnessed the act. The courtyard counterfeit remained untouched in the evidence cabinet. Mr. Sayer placed the coach-box disc beside the genuine Woldham rack. Mrs. Corbett said not to force it. I heard her, Thomas replied. He aligned the west-facing swallow as though it were genuine. The disc would not enter. He turned it. Reversed, the square edge scraped halfway into the slot with a harsh metallic sound. Thomas withdrew it immediately. A bright new line crossed the filed edge. The room fell silent. It was made to look like Marden, Mr. Sayer said, but not to work as Marden works. Thomas stared at the scrape. She told us that before the coach left. A groom appeared at the doorway, breathless from the lower yard. Your Grace, 2 Saturday riders passed the West Lodge less than 10 minutes after Mrs. Corbett's chaise. They took the Petersfield Road. Thomas's head came up. How far ahead? Perhaps 3 miles. He did not hesitate again. Tell Mercer to saddle 2 horses. Thomas left Woldham before the stable clock struck 7. Rain had begun again, fine at first, then harder as he and Mercer took the western road beneath a sky without moon or stars. He did not carry the coach-box disc. Mr. Sayer retained it in separate custody after the witnessed rack test. The courtyard counterfeit remained sealed in the Woldham evidence cabinet, and the genuine number 12 remained in the rack. Thomas took only the memory of the bright scrape across false brass and the knowledge that Alice had described the mechanism before he silenced her. The first miles passed through familiar estate lanes. Beyond the boundary stones, the road narrowed between dark hedges and low fields flooded by autumn rain. Mercer rode half a length behind, close enough to warn of ruts, but far enough to give Thomas the solitude he had not earned. The post-chaise had left nearly 20 minutes before the 2 Saturday riders. Thomas had left later still. He could not overtake by reckless speed without risking his horse or losing time to injury. At Midhurst, he changed mounts while Mercer questioned the night ostler. Mrs. Corbett's chaise came through an hour ago, the man said. Stopped only for a fresh pair. 2 gentlemen in Saturday colours followed, but they didn't change horses. Asked whether the chaise took the Winchester Road. Did they follow it? Thomas asked. They went south toward Petersfield. That answer brought no relief. The direct road to Marden lay westward beyond Petersfield, but Lark's Gate stood upon the same approach. Thomas remembered Alice's warning at the inquiry. Ask every gatekeeper for original timing records, before anyone connected to Satterley reaches them. She had not been fleeing thoughtlessly. She was following the evidence he had forbidden her to pursue. He mounted the fresh horse. "We take the Petersfield Road," he said. Mercer looked at the rain running from Thomas's hat brim. "Your Grace, the lower road floods near Fern Hollow. Then we use the ridge track and lose the time honestly." They rode on. The rain made every mile heavier. Mud pulled at the horses' hooves, and wind drove water beneath Thomas's collar. His back stiffened from the saddle. The old cavalry instinct urged him to force speed from the night, to treat exhaustion as proof of resolve. He resisted it. Men had once praised him for making decisions before fear could settle. He had accepted that praise so long that he had mistaken quickness for courage. At Woldham, Lady Mary had been injured. The county had been watching, and Reginald had offered a ready answer. Thomas had chosen it because uncertainty felt like failure. Alice had been made to carry the cost. Shortly before midnight, they reached a roadside posting inn where the keeper confirmed that Alice's chaise had stopped for hot water and directions. She asked about Lark's Gate. He said, wanted to know whether Mrs. Cole still kept the original passage slate. And the two riders came 10 minutes later, asked the same question, though not as politely. Thomas's gloved hand tightened around the reins. How far? 8 miles, perhaps 9. The toll house sits beyond the long rise. Thomas did not gallop. The road would not permit it. He and Mercer climbed through rain, changed to a safer pace on the descent, and reached Lark's Gate when the eastern horizon had only begun to pale. A post chaise stood beneath the toll house shed. One lamp still burned beside it. Alice was not inside. Thomas found her in the yard with Mrs. Baird, Mrs. Cole, and 2 men wearing dark green riding coats. One of the men held a folded paper close to Mrs. Cole's face. The other stood near the toll house door. "The trust requires the original slate," the first man said. "If you obstruct an official inquiry, your lease will not be renewed." Mrs. Cole was a narrow, grey-haired widow with a wool shawl drawn tightly around her shoulders. "You brought no seal from the trustees and no magistrate's order. Lord Satterley chairs the trust. He does not own my handwriting." Alice stood between Mrs. Cole and the men, her travel cloak dark with rain. "The slate will remain where it is until lawful custody is arranged." The second rider looked toward the road and saw Thomas. His expression changed. "Your Grace." Thomas dismounted carefully. Fatigue had settled into his legs, but he did not allow it to hurry his voice. "Show me your authority." The first rider bowed. "We were sent by Lord Satterley to secure route records before they could be altered." Written authority. His lordship's instruction was verbal. "Then you have no authority to remove anything." The man glanced at Alice. "Mrs. Corbett is under inquiry. Mrs. Corbett is not under arrest, and this toll house is not Woldham property." Thomas turned to Mercer. "Ride to the constable. Ask Mr. Hargreaves to attend as an independent trustee. Tell them no object has been removed and no one is detained." The Satterley riders stiffened at the last words. Thomas had no intention of giving Reginald the useful story of a duke imprisoning trust employees upon a private quarrel. "You may wait beneath the shed," he told them, "or you may leave. Your names and demand will be recorded either way." They chose to wait. Mrs. Baird guided Mrs. Cole inside. Alice remained in the yard, watching Thomas with a stillness colder than the rain. He removed his hat. Water ran down his hair and across his temple. "I came to warn you they were following. I had already found them. Yes, there was no graceful way past the truth. You found the record before I found you. That was the purpose. He looked toward the toll house window where Mrs. Cole lit a second lamp. "May I speak with you here?" Here, not privately, not within reach. Thomas accepted the boundary. "I tested the coachbox disc after you left. Mr. Sayer, the steward, and 2 trustees witnessed it. The courtyard disc remains sealed separately at Woldham. The genuine number 12 remains in the rack. And the coachbox disc, with Mr. Sayer. It entered only when reversed, the square edge scraped against the slot. As I said it would, as you said before the coach departed." Alice's face did not soften. "Why are you here, Thomas?" The use of his name struck deeper than formality would have. "Because I chose certainty when I was afraid. You chose Satterley. I chose the appearance of order. Reginald offered a structure already standing, and I used it before asking who had built the danger beneath us. You asked me to remain silent while that structure took my work. I did. He did not add that Lady Mary had been hurt. The fact explained his fear. It did not excuse what he had required of Alice. I was wrong." Rain ticked against the toll house roof. One of the Satterley men shifted beneath the shed, listening despite himself. Thomas did not lower his voice. "I withdrew your authority before the evidence was independently examined. I asked you to wait inside my house while another house controlled the road. I will not ask you to return to Woldham now." Alice's breath changed, almost imperceptibly. "Finding me is not trusting me." "No." Thomas looked at her directly. "Then tell me what trusting you requires. Begin by not asking me to forgive you because you rode through rain. I will not. Do not take Mrs. Cole's slate to Woldham. I will not. Do not speak for me before the trustees unless I ask. I will not." She studied him as though each answer were evidence that might yet fail under pressure. "Then stand where you are until the constable arrives." "I can do that." Mr. Hargreaves and the local constable came shortly after dawn. The 2 Satterley riders repeated their request, failed to produce written authority, and finally departed after their names and threat concerning Mrs. Cole's lease were recorded. Only then did Mrs. Cole bring out the original chalk slate. She held it herself while Alice opened the brass dividers over a road map spread upon the toll counter. 2 entries bore the same coach number. The first placed it at Lark's Gate under Satterley colours. The second, carried from the Western Bar by Mrs. Cole's sister's boy, recorded it under a Marden route board. The gates stood 7 miles apart. The written times differed by 12 minutes. Thomas leaned closer without touching the slate. No loaded stage could cover that distance so quickly. "Not on this road," Alice said. Then there were 2 coaches using 1 number, or 1 coach made to wear 2 names. Thomas looked from the impossible times to Alice's dividers measuring the road between them. "What do you need next?" She closed the instrument with a soft metallic click. Proof that the road did not change its story merely because powerful men preferred another one. By mid-morning on October 18th, the rain had thinned to a grey mist over Lark's Gate, and Thomas had changed into a dry coat, borrowed from the posting inn after taking food and several hours of rest. Weariness still showed in the stiffness of his movements, but he no longer looked as though the road itself had been holding him upright. Alice noticed without commenting. Mrs. Cole had closed the toll house parlour to ordinary visitors, and Mr. Hargreaves sat near the window while the local constable remained within call of the yard. The original timing slate still rested in Mrs. Cole's hands. No one had moved it. Shortly before 10, a hired chaise stopped beyond the bar. Mr. Owen Sayer descended with a narrow leather case secured by 2 seals and a written custody book beneath his arm. He entered the parlour, removed his wet gloves, and addressed the room before opening anything. The courtyard counterfeit disc remains separately sealed in the Woldham evidence cabinet under the steward's custody. The genuine Marden disc number 12 remains in the Woldham rack. I have brought only the coachbox counterfeit recovered at Gorsamere. Alice inclined her head, and the seal? Applied after the witnessed rack test yesterday. The fresh scrape was recorded before the disc was wrapped. Mr. Sayer placed the case upon the table. The constable, Mr. Hargreaves, Mrs. Cole, Thomas, Alice, and Mrs. Baird each examined the seals before he broke them. Inside lay the folded paper from Woldham. When Mr. Sayer opened it, the false disc appeared dull beneath the morning light. The west-facing swallow was clear. So was the bright scrape created when Thomas had turned it backward into the rack. Alice did not touch it at once. She opened her brass dividers and compared the diameter against the measurements entered in her private route book. "The face is close enough to deceive at a glance," she said. "The edge is not. The genuine disc is beveled to settle into the latch. This one has been filed square." Thomas stood opposite her, leaving the table's width between them. It was intended to look correct in a box, not to work correctly in a rack. Yes, then, whoever made it expected the disc to be found after failure, or expected someone to force it and damage the mechanism. Alice turned the dividers and measured the stamped swallow. One wing lay slightly lower than the other. This mark may identify the die. It is not a natural flaw in Marden's stamp. Mr. Sayer bent closer without moving the disc. "Can you prove that from your records?" "I can prove that no lawful Marden token carries this uneven wing. I cannot yet prove who cut the false one." She reached for the paper edge to rotate the disc without touching the filed brass. The folded sheet shifted. The token slid half an inch and caught the base of her right thumb before she drew back. A narrow red line appeared above her glove. Mrs. Baird rose. Thomas moved only one step, then stopped. "May I bind it?" he asked. Alice looked at his hands. He had not reached for her. The question remained between them, without pressure. "You may." Thomas took a clean strip of linen from Mrs. Cole's household box. Alice removed her glove and extended her hand across the corner of the table. His fingers closed lightly beneath her palm, steadying rather than enclosing. He wrapped the linen around the shallow cut and tied it without haste. His touch was careful, warm, and entirely deliberate. Alice felt the restraint in it more strongly than she would have felt urgency. When the knot held, he released her immediately. "Too tight? No? Does it pain you?" "Only enough to remind me the edge was meant to wound a mechanism." A flicker crossed his face. "Or a reputation." Alice drew her hand back. "Reputation is harder to bandage." Mr. Sayer resealed the disc after recording the cut and the condition of the edge. Alice replaced her glove carefully over the linen. Then she looked at Thomas. "Before we continue, there must be terms. Name them." "First, no evidence concerning Marden will enter private Woldham custody merely because Woldham has stronger doors." Agreed. "Second, no witness is to be offered money, land, employment, protection from lawful consequence or pressure through rank." Agreed. "Third, you will not announce protection, favor, or courtship in place of evidence. You will not speak for me before the trustees unless I ask you to do so." Something changed in his expression at the word courtship, but he did not question it. Agreed. These terms must be written. Mr. Sayer opened a clean page. Thomas signed beneath the conditions without alteration. Alice signed after him. Mrs. Cole and Mr. Hargreaves witnessed both names. Only then did Mrs. Cole bring the chalk timing slate to the center of the table. Mr. Sayer copied each entry before anyone touched the original surface. The same coach number appeared twice. One entry placed it at Lark's Gate under Satterley colours. The other, brought from the Western Bar, recorded a Marden board 12 minutes later. When the copy was complete, Mrs. Cole placed the slate between two thin boards supplied by Mr. Sayer. "I am giving this voluntarily," she said, "because I want the times read as I wrote them, not as Lord Satterley prefers them." "That statement will be recorded," Mr. Sayer replied. She signed the receipt. Mr. Sayer sealed the boards and returned a witnessed copy of the entries to her. By early afternoon, a messenger arrived from Gossamer with notice that the damaged coach remained under guard and that the transfer Alice had requested was ready to begin. She did not travel back. Such a journey would have consumed the day and placed every object through unnecessary hands. Instead, Mr. Sayer sent written instructions carried by the constable's deputy. At Gossamer, the local constable, the Woldham steward, the head coachman, and a village wheelwright witnessed the left side panel being detached from the damaged coach. The Marden route board remained fixed to that panel. Before any bolt was loosened, each head was marked in chalk and entered on the receipt. The panel was wrapped in canvas, placed flat upon an estate wagon, and sealed at both ends. The damaged coach itself remained at Gossamer under guard. No wheel, box, board, or fitting beyond the left side panel moved with the wagon. Near dusk, the estate team reached Lark's Gate. Mr. Sayer checked the seal against the Gossamer receipt. Mrs. Cole unlocked the outbuilding, and the wrapped panel was carried inside before witnesses. Only after the door closed against the wind did Mr. Sayer break the transport seals. The route board still bore Marden Woldham in cream letters upon black. At a distance it looked proper. Up close its upper bolts sat in holes whose wood fibres were pale and fresh, the lower holes no longer aligned with the original fixing points. Alice crouched beside the panel, keeping her bandaged thumb away from the wood. The board was fitted recently. The head coachman held a lantern lower. Along the underside, where the black paint had not reached, a strip of dark green showed through. Near the lower corner, chalky white residue remained caught in the grain. Mrs. Cole frowned. "Lime wash. The Satterley relay yard paints its service boards green," Alice said. "Its lower walls are lime-washed." Thomas did not seize upon the conclusion. "Does that prove the board came from their yard?" "It suggests storage or fitting there. It does not yet prove who ordered it." He nodded. "What would prove more? Compare these bolt heads with Marden hardware and Satterley relay tools. Trace the paint layers. Find the brass worker who cut the swallow die, and discover whether the same coach number was deliberately preserved when the board changed." Thomas looked at the green beneath the false Marden black. "Then that is the order." Alice rose. "No, that is the question. The order comes after we know who is qualified to answer it." He accepted the correction without defense. The panel was placed upon two trestles inside the outbuilding. Mrs. Cole locked the door. Mr. Sayer applied his seal across the latch. Mr. Hargreaves received written notice of any future opening. Thomas took no key. As the final light faded beyond the toll bar, Alice stood with her injured hand resting against the case that held her brass dividers. One false disc had carried her mark. Now an entire coachboard wore her name over another colour. Someone had not merely copied Marden. Someone had built a second identity and expected the county to mistake appearance for truth. On the morning of October 19th, Mr. Sayer, broke the seal upon Mrs. Cole's outbuilding only after she had unlocked the door herself, and Mr. Hargreaves had confirmed receipt of the opening notice. Thomas stood outside the threshold until Alice entered. He carried no key, offered no instruction, and did not ask that the detached coach panel be moved anywhere more secure. The left side panel rested upon the same trestles where it had been placed 2 evenings earlier, the Marden Woldham board still fixed across its outer face. Nothing had shifted. The transport seals had already been removed under witness in Part 5. But Mr. Sayer checked the chalk marks placed around each bolt before permitting the day's examination to begin. Samuel Dyer, the coach smith from Marden, laid 3 examples of lawful Marden hardware upon a clean cloth. Each bolt head had 2 flattened sides. Each bore the shallow file notch his workshop used to match the proper wrench. The bolts holding the disputed board were rounded all the way around. Fine parallel scratches crossed their heads. Those weren't fitted at Marden, Dyer said. Our wrench would have gripped them at the flat. These were tightened with a narrow clamp. Alice crouched beside the panel, keeping her bandaged right thumb clear of the wood. Could a clamp of that size be common to posting yards? Common enough, Dyer replied, but not common to ours. He held a wooden measuring slip against the scratches. The jaws were narrower than a wheelwright's vise, more like the travelling clamps used in relay sheds where men replace fittings in haste. Thomas remained a pace behind Alice's left shoulder. Does the mark identify a particular yard? No, Your Grace. Dyer glanced toward Alice before continuing. It tells us what sort of tool was used, not who held it. Then we stop there, Thomas said. The answer drew Alice's attention. Only days earlier, he would have treated a likely connection as permission to decide. Now he allowed the evidence to end where certainty ended. Dyer lifted the lower corner of the board without loosening its bolts. Beneath the black paint ran a strip of dark green. The color had been hidden where the board overlapped the panel. Pale, chalky residue clung beside it. Alice held a magnifying lens above the grain. The black layer is newer than the green. And the white? Mr. Sayer asked. Lime wash, most likely. It has settled into the old scratches beneath the black. Mrs. Cole folded her arms. The lower walls of Satterley Relay Yard are lime-washed every autumn. So are many service walls, Alice said, and dark green is not a private colour. Thomas looked toward the board. But the two together suggest where we should ask questions. Yes, they do not prove where the panel was altered. Dyer compared the misaligned lower holes with the original mounting points. The first set had darkened with age and road dust. The newer holes remained pale. Whoever changed the board did it recently, he said. They kept the old coach number and covered the first identity without replacing the panel. Alice straightened. That would explain the timing slate. One vehicle could enter a yard under Satterley colours, disappeared behind a shed, and leave wearing Marden's name. How long would the exchange require? Thomas asked, with tools ready and men who had practiced. Dyer considered. 4 or 5 minutes. Not 12 miles of travel, Alice said. Only one change of clothing, Mr. Sayer recorded every conclusion with its limit. The panel was then returned to the trestles, the door locked by Mrs. Cole, and the latch resealed. Thomas did not ask to hold the duplicate notice or inspect the key. When the formal work ended, Mrs. Cole insisted upon tea in the toll-house parlour. Rain had begun again, though lightly, and a small fire softened the damp air. Alice removed her glove with care. The linen around her thumb remained clean. Thomas had changed into a properly fitted dark coat brought from Woldham, and showed no trace of the exhausted rider except a slight stiffness when he sat. Mrs. Cole reached for the sugar basin. Thomas spoke before she could ask. "Mrs. Corbett takes none." Alice looked at him across the table. "You remember. You refused it every morning at Woldham. I was unaware your Grace observed breakfast so closely. I observed you." The words were quiet and unadorned. He did not turn them into praise. He did not look away. Alice lifted her cup and let the unsweetened tea warm her hands. Observation and understanding are different skills. "I have recently received proof of that." Mrs. Cole moved toward the toll counter, hiding a smile in the arrangement of spoons. Mrs. Baird sat near the window with her sewing. Mr. Sayer reviewed his notes beside the fire. Thomas unfolded a military road map on the table between himself and Alice. A straight red line crossed the disputed stretch between Lark's Gate and the Western Bar. "According to this, the distance is little more than 6 miles. Alice bent over the map. "According to this, the coach also passes through 2 hedges, a drainage ditch, and the eastern slope of a hill." Thomas studied the line. It was prepared for cavalry. Were cavalry horses expected to fly? Only when the quartermaster general had misjudged the ground. The dryness of his answer caught her unprepared. A laugh escaped her, small but genuine. Thomas's expression changed as though the sound had reached somewhere his apology could not. Alice felt the warmth of the moment and chose not to retreat from it immediately. She placed one point of her brass dividers at Lark's Gate and the other along the turnpike bend. A coach follows the road as it exists, not the road a draftsman prefers. "Show me." She measured the true distance around the hill, across the narrow bridge, and past the western rise. Thomas watched without interrupting. Their heads inclined over the same map, close enough for shared concentration, but not touch. When Alice looked up, his eyes were already on her. The silence lasted one breath longer than professional courtesy required. She closed the dividers and returned them to the map case. "The next inquiry is not distance," she said. "It is origin. We need the brass worker who cut the false swallow and the yard that possessed a clamp matching those bolt marks." Thomas accepted the change in subject. "Mr. Sayer has sent inquiries to Midhurst, Petersfield, and Winchester." "Without using the Woldham name?" "Through his own office." "Good." 2 days later, on October 21st, an answer arrived from Midhurst. The message was delivered by a tradesman's apprentice and addressed to Mr. Sayer. Josiah Bell, brass founder, stated that a foreman from the Satterley lower relay yard had ordered a small die bearing a flying swallow. The order had been placed on October 2nd. The customer demanded speed, supplied a rough drawing, and paid only half the agreed price. Bell had not finished polishing the die. He still possessed it, along with the work order carrying his counterstamp. "Did he name the foreman?" Thomas asked. Mr. Sayer read the final line, "Pullen." Alice felt the separate clues draw nearer without yet becoming one accusation. A Satterley foreman ordered a swallow die. That does not prove Lord Satterley ordered him. "No," Thomas said. "It gives us a witness to approach, not a verdict." Before Mr. Sayer could compose the request, a rider from Midhurst entered the yard carrying a printed handbill damp from rain. Copies had appeared outside the market hall, at 2 coaching inns, and beside the turnpike notice board. Across the top, heavy type declared, "The Widow Corbett, Ghost Coach." The notice accused Marden, posting house, of operating a second vehicle under a duplicate route number and collecting unlawful tolls. At the bottom, the trustees appointed under the Local Turnpike Act announced A special public meeting for the following morning. Araminta's language was unmistakable even without her name. It turned suspicion into entertainment before Alice had been permitted to present a defense. Then a second message arrived. A coach had been detained near Midhurst Market Yard. It bore a freshly bolted Marden board. Inside its locked box, the constable had found 3 counterfeit relay discs and a duplicate toll cash box. Thomas read the report once, then handed it to Alice. "They have built the business they mean to accuse you of running." Alice looked toward the sealed outbuilding where one false identity remained preserved beneath black paint. "Then tomorrow," she said, "we show the trustees the difference between a name and the truth beneath it. By 10 o'clock on the morning of October 22nd, Midhurst Market Yard had become a public chamber without walls. Farmers, carriers, coach proprietors, innkeepers, and county families crowded beneath awnings and carriage hoods, while the detained vehicle stood in the center of the square under constable guard. Its freshly painted board declared Marden in cream letters upon black. Rain had softened the surface enough to expose a narrow strip of dark green beneath one edge. 3 brass relay discs lay upon a cloth-covered table beside a duplicate toll cash box. The local magistrate stood near the evidence with his clerk. At a second table sat the turnpike trustees, appointed under the local act, their own clerk prepared to record every vote. The magistrate had authority to receive statements and hold suspected evidence. The trustees had authority over contracts, gates, and trust officers. Alice took some comfort in the distinction. It meant no single room, title, or office controlled the whole truth. She arrived with Mrs. Baird and Mr. Sayer shortly before the meeting began. Her right thumb no longer required a bandage, though the shallow cut remained tender beneath her glove. Thomas stood near the trustees' table with Mr. Hargreaves. Lady Mary sat beneath the covered arcade, her cane resting beside her chair, and her right ankle supported upon a low stool. Her left shoulder was healing, but Dr. Henshaw had forbidden long periods of standing. When Alice crossed the yard, Mary met her eyes and inclined her head. It was not pity. It was public recognition. Lady Araminta saw the exchange and moved before the trustee's clerk had finished calling the meeting to order. "How fortunate that Mrs. Corbett has come," she said. "The county may finally learn why a second coach bears her colours, carries her tokens, and collects tolls under her route number." The crowd stirred. Alice walked to the evidence table without haste. Reginald Breton stood beside the senior trustee, composed and immaculate. "Mrs. Corbett," he said, "this vehicle was detained yesterday near Midhurst Market. Its locked box contained 3 counterfeit discs and a second cash box holding receipts from gates for which Marden had no lawful authority." "Then someone built it to accuse Marden," Alice replied, "or Marden built it to profit beyond its contract. That is a conclusion. I came to examine facts." The magistrate ordered the seals checked. The constable confirmed that the discs and cash box had been removed from the detained coach in the presence of witnesses and had remained under magistrate custody overnight. Mr. Sayer confirmed that none of the objects had entered Woldham custody. Thomas held no key and had signed no handling order. When the first disc was placed upon the table, Alice bent close without touching it. The swallow faced west. The edge was square. So were the other 2. "They are false," she said. One of the trustees frowned. "They bear your mark. They bear an imitation of my mark. A genuine Marden disc enters the rack with the swallow facing east and the edge beveled. These were made to resemble Marden in a coach box not to function in a lawful relay rack. A rival proprietor, named Mr. Vane, stepped from the crowd. "You had the Duke of Woldham's patronage, Mrs. Corbett. Did that permit you to run an unlicensed second coach while smaller operators paid every gate?" The question drew a harder silence than Araminta's insult. Alice faced him. "No patronage permits fraud, nor does patronage make a false object genuine. Look at the bolts upon that board before you decide whose business the coach served." The magistrate ordered the ghost coach route board removed under witness. 2 constables carried it to the trestles. Its upper holes were pale and newly cut. The bolts did not align with the older mounting points. When the board was lifted, green paint showed beneath the black. "Satterley green," someone called. Reginald's voice sharpened. "A common shade." "Yes," Alice said. "The color alone proves no owner. It proves only that this board wore another identity before it wore mine." Araminta gave a light, incredulous laugh. "You expect society to admire your cleverness while Lady Mary still walks with a cane." Lady Mary answered from the arcade. "I walk with a cane because the Gorsamere's sign-arm was turned. Mrs. Corbett warned us before the coach left." Heads turned. Thomas looked at his sister, then back to the trustees. He did not speak for Alice. The senior trustee examined the 3 counterfeit discs, the duplicate cash box, and the freshly bolted board. Until responsibility is determined, the trust may need to seize all Marden route materials, private records, tokens, boards, and account books connected with this service. "No," Thomas said. The word crossed the yard with the force of command. But what followed was not an order. "Your Grace," the senior trustee replied, "this is trust business." "Then let the trust conduct it lawfully. Woldham will not surrender Mrs. Corbett's private property to Satterley, nor will Woldham seize it itself." Reginald's jaw tightened. "You risk your house upon her word." Thomas stepped away from the trustees' table so no one could mistake his position for theirs. He faced the yard. At Woldham, Mrs. Corbett identified the first counterfeit disc before departure. After the accident, a second false disc was found in the coach box. The Gorsamere sign-arm had been forcibly altered. Despite those facts, I withdrew her authority and placed temporary route control in Satterley hands before the evidence had been independently examined. The crowd became utterly still. Thomas continued. "I called that caution. It was not. I chose speed, certainty, and the appearance of order because my sister had been injured, and my house was afraid of looking weak. Mrs. Corbett's judgment had been correct. Mine had not." Alice felt the words reach every person who had watched her walk into the yard beneath suspicion. Thomas did not turn toward her for absolution. "I withdraw the suspension I imposed upon her," he said. "I do not ask this trust to accept her innocence because I say so. I ask only that no private Marden property be seized before evidence establishes lawful cause. Any disputed object may remain under the magistrate's seal and witnessed receipt." One trustee shifted uneasily. "The Woldham Night Coach contract cannot continue while sabotage remains unresolved." Alice stepped into the open space beside the trestles. "Then suspend that contract. Do not close Marden posting house. Do not seize records unrelated to this route. Suspend what failed, preserve what may show why, and permit me to demonstrate how one coach could carry 2 names." The senior trustee looked at her sharply. "You claim you can prove that." "I can prove the method. Whether the method identifies its author will depend upon the remaining evidence." She opened her brass dividers over the map Mr. Sayer placed upon the table. "The timing slate at Larksgate records the same coach number at 2 gates 7 miles apart within 12 minutes. The accident panel shows a newly fitted Marden board over earlier green paint. This detained coach carries duplicate tokens and a second cash box. I propose a witnessed trial of the route using empty coaches, professional drivers, neutral timekeepers, and no passenger placed at risk. A spectacle, Araminta said. A measurement, Alice replied. Distance is less easily persuaded than society. A few men in the crowd hid smiles. The senior trustee conferred with his fellows while the magistrate remained silent, correctly refusing to decide a contractual matter. At last, the trustee rose. The Woldham Night Coach contract remains suspended. Marden Posting House may continue all other lawful business. No private Marden records or tools will be seized. Evidence already held by the magistrate, and Mr. Sayer remains under separate custody. Mrs. Corbett may submit a written plan for a witnessed road trial. Relief moved through Alice without becoming triumph. Her name was not cleared. Her livelihood remained vulnerable, yet she had not been silenced. Reginald approached as the clerk completed the vote. "Enjoy your narrow reprieve," he said quietly. "Satterley controls more gates than Marden will ever own. Continue this allegation, and no future Woldham route crossing my roads will contract with you." Alice met his gaze. "Then every proprietor will know what cooperation with your trust costs." He left without bowing. Rain thickened over the market yard. Mrs. Baird had gone to bring the chaise nearer. Mud filled the ruts between the trestles and the paving stones. Thomas approached Alice, but stopped beyond the reach of her hand. "May I offer you my arm?" She looked at the wet ground, then at him. His public correction had cost him pride, authority, and the easy support of his own class. It did not erase Woldham. It did prove he would tell the truth before final proof made truth safe. "For the yard," she said. "Nothing more." "For the yard." Alice placed her gloved hand upon his forearm. Thomas did not cover it with his own. He adjusted his pace to hers as they crossed the mud. The contact lasted only until they reached the paving stones. Then Alice released him. Behind them, the ghost coach remained under guard, its false Marden board darkening in the rain. Ahead, Mr. Sayer waited with clean paper for the plan that would force the road to answer for every name it had been made to wear. By the morning of October 23rd, Alice had reduced the county's scandal to 3 questions that no title could answer for her. Could a false Marden disc enter the rack in ordinary use? Could one coach exchange identities quickly enough to appear under 2 names? Could any stage travel 7 miles in 12 minutes on the Petersfield Road? She wrote the questions at the top of a clean page in Mrs. Cole's toll-house parlour, then placed her brass dividers beside the route map. Mr. Sayer sat at the far end of the table with the trustee's written permission for a witnessed road trial. Mrs. Baird occupied the chair nearest the open door. Outside, the turn bell sounded for an ordinary carrier, a reminder that the road continued to collect its tolls while Alice's name remained disputed. Thomas arrived with Mercer and 2 Woldham grooms, but he left the men beyond the toll-house boundary. He carried a narrow document case rather than an order. "I have brought a security plan," he said. "You may reject it." Alice looked up. "That is an improvement in its opening sentence." A faint curve touched his mouth. He spread the paper across the table. Woldham would provide a locked evidence chest, estate guards, and transport to Gorsamere. The chest would be kept in a stone room at Woldham Park until the trustees assembled. Alice read only the first half before Thomas laid 2 fingers upon the lower edge of the page. "No," he said. Mr. Sayer's pen paused. Alice waited. Thomas looked toward the sealed outbuilding, where the detached left coach panel remained under Mr. Sayer's seal and Mrs. Cole's key. If Woldham holds the evidence, your innocence still depends upon my custody. Strong walls do not correct that. Alice closed the document case without touching his hand. They do not. Then the plan is withdrawn. He folded it once and returned it to the case. He did not ask to be praised for recognizing the danger before she named it. That restraint carried more weight than the offer would have done. Alice turned the clean page toward him. The physical evidence remains divided. Mr. Sayer keeps the legal seals. Mrs. Cole keeps the outbuilding key. Mr. Hargreaves receives written notice before any opening. I keep a complete inventory copy. You hold no key. Agreed. The magistrate retains the ghost coach board, the 3 counterfeit discs found at Midhurst, and the duplicate cash box. The courtyard counterfeit remains separately sealed at Woldham. The coach box counterfeit remains with Mr. Sayer. Nothing is combined for convenience. Agreed. And I decide whether the road portion proceeds. If the bridge, surface or visibility is unsafe, no pressure from the trustees will move a wheel. Thomas's gaze held hers. Your decision? Mr. Sayer recorded each term. Alice signed first. Thomas signed beneath her as supporting patron and witness, not as owner of the trial. Mrs. Cole signed for the key. Mr. Hargreaves's clerk would receive a copy before sunset. Only then did Alice begin the route design. The first demonstration occurs under cover, she said. We compare a genuine east-facing disc with a false west-facing disc. No one forces the counterfeit beyond the point already recorded at Woldham. The second, Thomas asked, a board exchange upon an empty comparison coach. 2 neutral workmen. The same coach number remains visible before and after. Mr. Sayer looked toward the map. And the timing. Alice set one point of the dividers at Larksgate, and the other along the western rise. 2 empty coaches, each with driver, guard, and neutral timekeeper. No passenger. One travels the lawful road at ordinary safe pace. The other waits behind the relay shed until the board exchange is complete. We compare actual time with Mrs. Cole's slate. Thomas unfolded a military map from his case, but before placing it on the table, he examined the straight red line crossing the disputed ground. This one still believes the hedges have agreed to move. Alice glanced at him. Has the Quartermaster General finally surrendered? Not entirely. I have brought him for public correction. He laid the map beside hers. The red line crossed a drainage ditch and the eastern slope of the hill, just as it had when they examined it 2 days earlier. This time, Thomas took up a pencil and drew a small circle around the ditch. Impassable by coach, he said. Alice pointed to the hedge. And that, inconvenient to everyone except military draftsmen. A quiet laugh passed between them, familiar now rather than surprising. It lasted only a moment. Alice returned to the road as it existed. The lawful route bends here, crosses the narrow bridge, then climbs toward the western bar. The trial pace must be reduced if the ground remains soft. Where do you place the witnesses? At the first bar, the relay shed, the bridge, and Gorsamere Fork. The sign arm must be inspected before dawn, marked, and secured under the constable's eye. Thomas rested his hands behind his back. Where do you place me? At the first bar for the token comparison. Then at Gorsamere when the sign arm is examined. You will not ride ahead, alter the sequence, or answer a trustee's question on my behalf unless I ask. I understand. Do you? Alice's voice remained even. At Woldham, you understood each fact separately. You failed when they demanded a choice. Thomas did not look away. Then judge the choice when it comes. The answer did not ask her to soften. Alice marked his position on the witness list. By afternoon, the plan had acquired times, stopping points, cancellation conditions, and named custodians. Mr. Sayer prepared the version for the trustees. Alice signed it as designer of the trial. Thomas signed only beneath a statement that Woldham would supply 2 sound empty coaches, professional drivers, and no authority over evidence or signals. A rider arrived before the ink had dried. He carried a notice sealed by Reginald Breton. The letter declared that no future Woldham route crossing a Satterley controlled gate would contract with Marden Posting House if Alice continued to accuse the trust or its officers of fraud. Thomas read the notice once. "I can open another road." "Not before winter," Alice said, "and not without forcing every small carrier between your favour and his gates." "Then I will pay the difference until the road is established." No. She did not need to explain at length. He heard the reason before she gave it. "That would make Marden's survival look purchased by Woldham," he said. "Yes." Thomas placed the notice before Mr. Sayer. "Keep it as evidence of pressure, not proof of sabotage." Alice met his eyes. Exactly. The distinction mattered. He had not merely repeated her words. He had reached the boundary himself. Near dusk, the toll-house maid entered with a sealed note delivered by a dark green carriage waiting beyond the bar. The paper bore Lady Araminta's hand. She requested a private conversation the following morning, and promised a practical settlement that would restore Marden's contracts without further public unpleasantness. Mrs. Baird read the note over Alice's shoulder. "There is no such thing as a private settlement offered in a carriage without a crest." Thomas stood near the window, but did not ask to see the letter until Alice handed it to him. He read it and returned it along the same crease. "You don't have to meet her." "No," Alice said, "but I will." "Alone?" "Mrs. Baird will sit in the adjoining room. The door will remain open." Thomas gave one restrained nod. "Where do you want me?" Alice looked at the withdrawn security plan, the sealed outbuilding, and Reginald's threat now resting in neutral custody. "Not in the room," she said, "but near enough that Lady Araminta remembers I am free to leave." Lady Araminta's carriage arrived at Lark's gate shortly after 10 on the morning of October 25th, without the Breton crest upon its door. Alice received her in the toll-house parlour with Mrs. Baird seated in the adjoining room, and the connecting door left open. Thomas remained outside near the bar with Mercer, close enough to be summoned but too far away to hear ordinary conversation. Araminta removed one glove finger by finger and surveyed the plain furniture with faint distaste. "You've made this needlessly public," she said. "The accident was public," Alice replied. "The false coach was public. Your handbills were public. You can't prove I wrote them. I did not say I could." Araminta placed a folded paper upon the table. "My father is prepared to restore Marden's access to every Satterley-controlled gate. The trustees will be encouraged to regard the ghost coach as the private enterprise of a dismissed ostler. Your contracts will survive. Mrs. Cole's lease will be renewed. The county will be allowed to forget this unpleasantness." Alice did not touch the paper. "Which ostler? Does the name matter?" "It matters to the man you intend to ruin. A servant can find another place, not after being named a thief, a counterfeiter, and the cause of Lady Mary's injury." Araminta leaned forward. "You are willing to lose your business for a man you do not know. I am unwilling to save it by inventing guilt. Do not be theatrical. Men of his class are blamed every day. That does not make the blame true. The composure in Araminta's face thinned. My father controls the gates between here and Woldham. He controls hiring, leases, repairs, toll appointments, and the credit of carriers who use them. You own one posting house and a cottage. The Duke may admire your principles now, but admiration cools when it becomes expensive. Alice felt the truth within the threat. Reginald did not need a courtroom to defeat Marden. He needed only to make every road costlier than surrender. Then I will lose honestly, she said. How noble. No, merely less cruel than your offer. Araminta pushed the paper closer. Read it. Is the ostler named? Not yet. Then it is an empty space waiting for a poor man's name. Alice slid the paper back unopened. Take it with you. Araminta rose. When Marden's yard is empty. Remember that I offered you a road out. You offered me someone else beneath the wheels. Anger replaced elegance in Araminta's expression for one breath. Then she drew on her glove. A widow can't defeat an earl who owns the gates. Alice stood. He does not own the road. He only believes no one will make him answer for what he does upon it. Araminta left without replying. Thomas did not enter until the carriage had passed beyond the bend. Even then, he paused at the open door. May I come in? Yes. He crossed the threshold but remained beside the table. What did she offer? Contracts, Mrs. Cole's lease, and public forgetfulness in exchange for blaming an unnamed dismissed ostler. His expression hardened. There is no ostler. That is why the bargain is useful. An unnamed man cannot contradict the story until they choose one weak enough to silence. Thomas looked at the place where the paper had rested. Did she leave anything? No, she took it with her. Then Mrs. Baird can confirm the conditions of the meeting, not words she did not clearly hear. Exactly. Before he could say more, Mrs. Cole entered from the toll counter, holding a letter with both hands. The Satterley trust agent informed her that the cottage attached to Lark's Gate would not be renewed at Michaelmas, unless the tenant demonstrated satisfactory cooperation. They mean to put me out, Mrs. Cole said. Not before lawful notice expires, Thomas replied. But afterward, Alice took the letter only after Mrs. Cole offered it. You may come to Marden Cottage. There are 2 dry rooms above the east kitchen. You can assist with route records until the inquiry ends, and after that we will agree upon work that suits you. Mrs. Cole shook her head. I won't take charity. Then do not. Take employment and a roof while Mr. Sayer examines this lease. Thomas drew breath. I could purchase. He stopped. The silence that followed was recognition, not uncertainty. No, he said. If I purchase the cottage now, Satterley will say, her evidence was bought with a ducal roof. Alice had prepared to oppose him. She had not expected him to reach the boundary first. Yes, she said. That is what they would say. Thomas looked at Mrs. Cole. Then I will not offer money, land, employment, or preferment. Your statement must remain yours. Mrs. Cole studied him. Thank you, Your Grace. Do not thank me for declining to damage your word. Mr. Sayer arrived before noon and reviewed the lease notice. He arranged for Mrs. Cole's voluntary statement to be taken that afternoon with Mr. Hargreaves and Mrs. Baird present. Thomas remained outside during the signing. He neither paced near the window nor sent questions through the door. When Mrs. Cole emerged with her copy, he bowed and said only, Your courage will be recorded with your evidence. Alice watched him turn away before gratitude could become pressure. She had loved the man who rode through rain. But riding was dramatic and control could easily wear the face of protection. This was different. He had stopped himself before using power. He had accepted absence as care. That did not erase Woldham. It made a future imaginable. In the late afternoon, a small trade cart stopped beside the bar. Josiah Bell, brass founder of Midhurst, climbed down carrying a locked wooden box and a leather ledger wrapped against the damp. Mr. Sayer examined both before Bell opened the box in the presence of Alice, Thomas, Mrs. Cole, and Mr. Hargreaves. Inside lay an unfinished steel die no longer than a man's thumb. The swallow cut into its face flew west. One wing sat fractionally lower than the other, matching the defect Alice had measured upon the coach box disc. Beside it rested a work order stamped JB over 3 points and marked with a crossed S. "That is my counterstamp," Bell said. The crossed S was the customer's yard mark. Mr. Pullen brought the drawing on October 2nd and demanded haste. He paid 1 guinea and left the second unpaid. Alice examined the die without touching it. "Did he tell you who instructed him?" "No, ma'am. Only that the lower relay yard required trial pieces before the Woldham route opened." Thomas waited until Alice had finished. "Would you give that statement before the magistrate and trustees?" Bell hesitated. "I will, provided no one calls me a liar, before the men who account for half my custom. The evidence must protect your statement," Alice said. "Not a promise from His Grace." Mr. Sayer recorded the transfer of the die and work order into separate sealed packets. Before the seals cooled, a boy arrived on foot with a message sewn into the lining of his cap. It bore no signature, but the hand was cramped and hurried. Pullen would speak before the magistrate and trustees. He would not enter a private room with Lord Satterley or accept protection from Woldham. He also possessed a yard instruction slip bearing the initials R.B., and he would surrender it only where every interested party could see the seal broken. Alice read the message twice. Bell's die connected the false swallow to the Satterley yard. The hidden instruction might connect the yard to the man who believed he owned every gate. Thomas looked at her, waiting rather than deciding. "We arrange the magistrate," she said, "and we do not ask Pullen for more than he has offered until he is safe enough to speak freely." Outside, the toll bell sounded for another lawful coach. This time, Alice heard the approaching weight of a witness who might finally make power answer in its own handwriting. On the afternoon of October 27th, Mr. Owen Sayer arranged 3 sealed packets upon the long table at Lark's Gate, and left enough space between them that no careless hand could confuse one object with another. The incomplete reversed swallow die remained in its own wrapper. Josiah Bell's work order occupied a second packet. The coachbox counterfeit disc rested separately in the leather evidence case. The courtyard counterfeit still remained sealed at Woldham. The genuine number 12 remained in the Woldham rack. The accident panel remained locked in Mrs. Cole's outbuilding, and the ghost coach materials remained under the Midhurst magistrate. Alice checked each entry against her inventory before Bell approached the table. He opened his copied workshop ledger to the October 2nd order and pointed to the crossed S beside the unpaid balance. "That mark came from the customer," he said. "I used JB over 3 points. The crossed S wasn't mine." The local magistrate leaned nearer without touching the page. "And the defect in the swallow," Bell indicated the lower wing cut into the unfinished die. "I had not polished this edge. Any disc struck from it would carry the same little drop in the wing." Alice thought of the coachbox token, the uneven stamp she had measured, and the first false disc still waiting at Woldham. "You can identify the die as yours," she said, "but not the person above Mr. Pullen who ordered it." "That's right, Mum." "Then say no more than that." Bell gave her a grateful look. Sayer resealed the die and work order after the magistrate recorded the comparison. Shortly before 4, Mercer returned from the Crown and Wheel with word that Mr. Pullen had arrived but refused to enter the toll house while any Breton servant remained in sight. The magistrate agreed to meet him in the inn's private room. Alice went with Miss Sayer, Thomas, and Mr. Hargreaves. The constable waited outside the door. Pullen stood beside the cold hearth when they entered, his hat crushed between both hands. He was a broad man made smaller by fear, with dark hollows beneath his eyes and grease still caught along the nails of one hand. "I'm not giving Lord Satterley a private room to call mine a confession," he said. "Nor his Grace." Thomas remained nearest the door. "You won't be asked to, Mr. Sayer placed no prepared statement before Pullen. "You may leave at any time. No one here can promise freedom from lawful consequence. You may ask that your wages, duties, and previous conduct be attached to any statement, so they cannot later be invented against you." Pullen looked toward the magistrate. "And if I name an earl's title does not prevent me from receiving information," the magistrate said. "It also does not permit me to decide guilt without examination." Some of the strain left Pullen's face, though not much. "I'll give enough for the public meeting, not the whole of it today." "That is your choice," Mr. Sayer replied. Pullen reached inside his coat and produced a folded slip protected by waxed cloth. He did not hand it to Thomas. He placed it upon the table before the magistrate. The paper was sealed with a plain yard wafer rather than a noble crest. Along one outer fold, the initials R.B. appeared beside a date 4 days before the Woldham launch. A notation in another hand read Lower Relay Stores. "I kept it because the instruction was wrong," Pullen said, "and because when men above you say a thing was never written, paper is the only witness they fear." "Have you opened it since receiving it?" the magistrate asked. "No. I read it when it was issued. I folded it again and kept it." Mr. Sayer recorded the condition of the wafer, the initials, the date, and every person present. He did not break the seal. "The contents will remain unopened until the trustees assemble," he said. "Do you consent to that?" "I do. Will you state what you can now?" Pullen swallowed. "I ordered the swallow die from Bell. I was told to use a west-facing drawing and to hurry the trial pieces. I arranged for a second board to be prepared in Marden colours. I won't name who gave the order until the slip is opened before the magistrate and trustees." "Were you paid beyond your wages?" Thomas asked. Pullen looked at him sharply. "No." Thomas inclined his head. "Then I won't ask again. I want that written." Mr. Sayer wrote it. Pullen also demanded that no offer of Woldham employment, land, money, or protection be made before his testimony. Thomas signed beneath the condition without comment. The sealed instruction slip passed into Mr. Sayer's custody under the magistrate's receipt. Pullen then gave a limited preliminary statement and left by the back stairs after the constable confirmed no Breton servant waited in the yard. The following evening, after the magistrate had approved the order for the public road trial, Alice remained at Lark's Gate to complete the sequence of signals. Mrs. Baird sat in the adjoining parlour within sight of the open anteroom door. Rain moved softly against the windows. Thomas entered only after Alice invited him, and closed neither door nor distance. She had placed the white signal flag, witness list, and route map upon a narrow desk. "The token comparison comes first," she said, "then the board exchange. The timed passage comes last. Pullen speaks only after the physical method has been shown. So no one can dismiss the road because they dislike the witness." "Exactly." Thomas studied the map. If the bridge rises above the marker stone, I cancel the road portion, even if the trustees accuse you of retreat. Especially then, safety cannot become theatre merely because truth needs an audience. Agreed. He did not add an argument. Alice marked the cancellation line and sanded the ink. Silence settled between them, not empty but unfinished. Thomas looked toward the rain-darkened toll bar. I have spent years believing that delay was the greater failure. Alice waited. In Spain, 2 reports reached me within minutes. One said a pass was clear. The other said French cavalry had crossed behind it. I delayed a squadron while I decided which report to trust. His voice remained controlled, but the control no longer hid the wound. By the time I ordered them forward, the road behind them had closed. Men were trapped who might have been clear if I had chosen sooner. Alice rested her hand upon the edge of the desk, and afterward I became quick. Officers praised me for certainty. Men obeyed because I appeared never to doubt. I learned to decide before fear could speak. That may have saved lives later. It did. He turned toward her, which made the habit harder to question. At Woldham, Mary was hurt. Satterley offered order, and I chose before listening had finished. I told myself speed was protection. In truth, I was protecting myself from the shame of uncertainty. Alice felt the confession differently from his apology at Lark's Gate. Then he had named the wrong. Now he had shown her the place inside him from which it came. A battlefield may require a choice before truth is complete, she said. A woman's life should not be governed as though she were a position on a map. No. He looked down at the route sheet. I made you bear the weakness I had trained everyone else to call strength. He did not ask her to excuse him. He brought one hand from behind his back and held it open between them, palm upward without crossing the space. I don't know whether I have earned this. Alice looked at the offered hand. It had held the lantern while she proved the first disc false. It had been refused at the carriage door. It had bound her thumb only after permission. Now it waited without demand. She placed her hand in his. Thomas closed his fingers carefully around hers. The warmth of the contact traveled through her more quietly than shock and more deeply than relief. Neither moved closer. Mrs. Baird remained visible beyond the open doorway. The rain continued against the glass. Thomas held Alice's hand as though steadiness mattered more than possession. I could love a man who changes, she said. I can't build a life with a man who only regrets. His thumb moved once across the back of her glove, then stilled. Then judge the change, not the sorrow. That will take time. Take it. And you won't ask for an answer before the public reckoning. I won't. Alice kept her hand in his while they reviewed the final order. Thomas would stand at the first bar for the token comparison, then move to Gossamer only when Alice signaled. He would not answer for her. He would not alter the pace. He would not allow any driver to press the horses beyond safety. When the last instruction was complete, Alice withdrew her hand. The absence of warmth was immediate, but it no longer felt like loss. A rider arrived near midnight with the latest weather report from Midhurst. Heavy rain was moving east. The lower bridge might flood before dawn. Thomas read the note and passed it to Alice without comment. She opened her brass dividers over the map, measured the safer stopping point, and marked the height of the stone that would decide whether the road trial lived or died. We inspect at first light, she said. If the water reaches this mark, no coach crosses. Thomas nodded. Your decision. Outside, the rain strengthened over the road that had not yet finished telling the truth. By dawn on October 29th, The rain had weakened to a cold mist over the Petersfield Road. Water still ran fast beneath the lower bridge at Gorsemere, but the level remained below the marker stone Alice had chosen. She inspected it herself with Mrs. Cole, Mr. Hargreaves, and 2 appointed coachmen present. The road surface was soft, not dangerous. Alice ordered a reduced trial pace, no passengers, and no movement without her white signal. Thomas accepted every alteration without debate. He remained at the first bar with Mercer, while Mr. Sayer carried the revised instructions to the trustees and magistrate. Near midday, Alice returned to the toll-house parlour to check the witness order. Mrs. Baird sat in the adjoining room, with the connecting door open. The brass dividers lay beside the route map, their repaired hinge dark against the polished arms. Alice had just marked the safer stopping point when a dark green carriage drew up beyond the bar. Lady Araminta entered in travelling grey, her face composed so carefully that the strain showed at the corners of her mouth. "You still intend to proceed," she said. "The road remains safe enough for the reduced pace. You speak as though a bridge and a flag are the only dangers." Alice set down her pencil. "What danger have I failed to measure?" Araminta's gaze passed over the maps, witness list, and sealed notices. "Public disgrace. My father exposed before trustees, carriers, and county families. Lady Mary's injury, repeated in every dining room from Chichester to London. House Brackenbury made to look careless. Thomas made to look weak. Lady Mary was injured because a road sign was altered and a coach identity was falsified. Society will not care for such distinctions, then society must learn them." Araminta took 1 step nearer. "You would teach society by humiliating an earl?" "I would refuse to hide evidence because an earl dislikes where it points." "Evidence?" Araminta repeated with contempt. "You have turned every human loyalty into seals, receipts, and measurements. Because loyalty without truth has already placed 1 coach in a ditch." "And what of Thomas?" Araminta asked. "Do you imagine he will thank you when his sister's pain becomes public testimony? Do you think his affection will survive hearing? House Brackenbury mocked for placing its trust in a widowed innkeeper?" Alice felt the question strike where Araminta intended. She did not answer quickly. "Lady Mary's pain is already real. Concealing its cause would not honour her. Thomas may not agree once the county has finished laughing. Then he will have the freedom to say so. You are prepared to lose him." Alice looked toward the open door where Mrs. Baird remained visible. Love that requires silence is fear with better manners. Araminta's composure fractured for 1 breath. "You presume much from a duke's apology." "I presume nothing. That is why the road trial proceeds. My father offered you safety. He offered me another man's ruin, and now you would ruin him instead. No, I will show what the objects, times, and witnesses establish. Consequence belongs to whoever created the danger." Araminta drew on 1 glove, each movement sharp. "When this ends, you may discover that truth is a lonely victory. Then I will stand alone rather than stand beside a lie." The 2 women regarded one another across the route map. Outside, a lawful coach passed the bar, and the toll bell sounded once. Araminta turned toward the door. "Do not pretend you were not warned." Alice's hand rested beside the closed dividers. "I was warned before the first coach left Woldham. I listened." Araminta departed without replying. Thomas did not enter at once. He waited until the dark green carriage disappeared beyond the bend, then stopped at the threshold. "May I come in?" "Yes." He crossed the room but remained on the opposite side of the map table. His eyes searched Alice's face. He did not ask what Araminta had said. "Has the trial order changed?" he asked. "Only the pace. The bridge is below the cancellation mark. Then I will notify the timekeepers." He turned toward the door. "Thomas." He stopped. Alice had used his name before in anger and disappointment. This time it carried neither. She said exposing her father would shame Lady Mary and House Brackenbury. Thomas faced her fully. "It will not." She asked whether you would forgive me for making your sister's injury public. "There is nothing to forgive." He came one step closer, leaving a proper distance between them. Mary asked Dr. Henshaw to bring her tomorrow. She said pain should not be turned into another woman's silence. Alice lowered her gaze for a moment. "She is braver than society will give her credit for. So are you. Do not praise me because you are afraid." "I am afraid." His answer came without hesitation. "I am afraid Pullen will lose his courage. I am afraid the trustees will bend toward Saturley. I am afraid the road will fail us. And I am afraid that when this is finished, you will decide that loving me requires too much vigilance." Alice looked up. Thomas's face held no demand, only truth he could no longer keep behind discipline. "It would require vigilance," she said. "Power returns to habit quickly. Then I must notice the habit before it reaches you. That is not a promise you make once. No, it is one I would have to keep every day." Silence gathered between them. Mrs. Baird remained within sight, her needle resting in her lap. Thomas did not move closer. "I love you, Alice," he said. The words entered the room without rank, bargain, or protection. They did not erase the breakfast room at Woldham. They stood beside it and accepted the judgment still due. Alice felt the full road between them, the lantern in the courtyard, the hand she had refused, the rain at Lark's Gate, the linen around her thumb, the open palm that had waited for hers. "I love you too," she said. Emotion moved across his face with such restraint that it hurt more than relief. Alice continued before he could speak. "But love cannot choose the road for me. Then I shall ask where you wish me to stand." Something in her loosened. Not the memory of betrayal, not caution, the fear that tenderness from him would always arrive carrying an instruction. Alice crossed the remaining distance. She placed both hands against his coat and stepped into his arms. Thomas held still until her choice was unmistakable. Then his arms came around her, firm and careful. Alice rested her cheek against his chest. Beneath the dark wool, his breath moved unevenly once before settling. He did not draw her tighter than she had invited. He simply held her while the tollhouse clock measured several quiet seconds. When Alice lifted her face, Thomas did not lower his head. "May I kiss you?" he asked. "Yes." She closed the distance herself. The kiss was warm, restrained, and free of haste. His hand remained at the middle of her back. Hers rested against his shoulder. Nothing in the touch asked her to forget. It acknowledged what had survived remembering. When she drew away, Thomas released her at once. Alice stayed near him for one breath longer, then stepped back. "We still have a road to prepare." His voice had roughened. "I am trying not to resent the trustees for existing." A quiet laugh escaped her. "You may resent them after they arrive on time." They returned to the map. Alice confirmed the signal sequence, the reduced pace, and the order of witnesses. Thomas carried the revised timing to the first bar. Mr. Sayer confirmed that Pullen's preliminary statement and the RB initialed instruction slip would remain sealed until the magistrate and trustees assembled. Near sunset, Alice walked the disputed section again with Mrs. Cole, Mr. Hargreaves, and the constable. At Gorsamere Fork, the sign-arm should have stood upon the lawful turnpike. and remained secured by the witnessed pin installed that morning. It had been forced several inches toward the quarry lane. Fresh scratches cut through the wet iron around the pin. Alice did not touch it. She raised the lantern while the constable marked the ground and posted a guard for the night. Someone had tried once more to make the road lie. This time, every eye in the county would be waiting when it told the truth. At 8 o'clock on the morning of October 30th, the altered sign arm at Gorsamere still pointed several inches toward the quarry lane, exactly as Alice had found it the previous evening. The constable had guarded it through the night. Fresh scratches crossed the wet iron around the witnessed pin, and mud beneath the post held no footprint that had been permitted to disappear beneath a helpful boot. Alice stood beside the fork, with her brass dividers closed in one hand, while the turnpike trustees appointed under the local act gathered beneath a canvas awning. Their clerk prepared the minute book. The local magistrate stood at a separate table with Mr. Owen Sayer and the constable. He would receive statements and take custody of anything suggesting sabotage or fraud. The trustees would decide contracts, trust officers, and the administration of the road. Lady Mary sat beneath a covered stand with her cane beside her chair and her right ankle resting upon a low stool. Mrs. Baird remained near Alice. Thomas stood at the first bar where Alice had assigned him, not beside the evidence table and not at her shoulder. Reginald Breton, Earl of Satterley, arrived with Lady Araminta shortly before the clerk called the session to order. Neither looked toward the sign-arm. The senior trustee addressed Alice. "Mrs. Corbett, you proposed a witnessed trial of the route. You may begin." Alice faced the gathered proprietors, carriers, trustees, and county witnesses. "We will answer 3 questions. Were the false Marden tokens made to function or only to carry my mark? Could one coach exchange identities within minutes? And could any lawful stage cover 7 miles of this road in 12 minutes? She did not name a culprit. The road had enough work to do without being asked to flatter suspicion. Mr. Sayer first called the Woldham steward. The man presented the original sealed packet containing the courtyard counterfeit disc, which had remained in the Woldham evidence cabinet since the launch. The seal, date, and custody record were read aloud. Mr. Sayer then produced the coachbox counterfeit disc in its separate wrapping. Last came the genuine Marden disc No. 12, brought that morning from the Woldham rack under written receipt. Alice placed the genuine token in the brass relay slot. The swallow faced east. The beveled edge entered cleanly and released the latch with a bright metallic click. She withdrew it. A lawful Marden disc works because mark and shape agree. She lifted the courtyard counterfeit with folded paper. Its swallow faced west. Its edge was square. This was found before departure. She set it beside the coach box disc. This was found after the accident. Both false swallows bore the same slight drop in the lower wing. Josiah Bell stepped forward when the magistrate opened the packet containing his incomplete steel die. Bell identified his counterstamp and the unfinished cutting edge. Any disc struck from this die before polishing would carry that lower wing, he said. Alice aligned the defect without forcing either token into the rack. 2 separately recovered counterfeits, 1 die flaw. Reginald's voice came from beneath the awning. "A foreman's private order does not establish an earl's instruction." "No," Alice said, "it establishes that the false tokens came from the same unlawful source. We proceed only as far as the evidence permits." The magistrate recorded the distinction. The damaged coach had remained under guard at Gorsamere since the accident. That morning, under receipt, it had been brought slowly to the bar without passengers. At Lark's Gate, Mrs. Cole had unlocked the outbuilding while Mr. Hargreaves witnessed Mr. Sayer breaking the seal. The detached left side panel had then been carried to Gorsamere under a new transfer record. It now rested upon trestles beside the same damaged coach from which it had been removed. The head coachman and Samuel Dyer refitted the panel temporarily without changing the marked bolt positions. Alice invited the trustees forward. They saw the fresh upper holes, the misaligned lower holes, the rounded bolt heads, and the narrow clamp scratches. When the Marden root board was lifted from the panel, dark Satterley green showed beneath the black paint. Lime white residue remained in the old grain. This board wore another colour before it wore mine, Alice said. That still does not prove who ordered the change. A second empty comparison coach waited behind the relay shed. Neutral workmen fitted a green root board upon it while the trustees watched. The coach number remained visible. At Alice's signal, the vehicle entered the yard under Satterley colours. It passed behind the shed. The magistrate called the minutes aloud. Before 5 minutes had elapsed, the same coach emerged, bearing a copied Marden board. Nothing about the vehicle had changed except the identity presented to the road. Murmurs moved through the crowd. Alice raised one hand. A board can change a name. It cannot shorten a mile. Mrs. Cole came forward with the original chalk timing slate, still protected between thin boards. She identified her own entry at Lark's Gate, and the second time carried from the Western Bar by her sister's boy. The same coach number appeared 7 miles apart within 12 minutes. Alice lowered the white flag. An empty stage set out upon the lawful road with a professional driver, guard, and neutral timekeeper. The pace had been reduced for soft ground. No passenger rode inside. At Gorsamere, the sign-arm was corrected only after every trustee, and the magistrate had inspected the fresh tampering. The witnessed pin was replaced. The coach followed the proper turn, crossed the narrow bridge, climbed the western rise, and reached the second bar after 44 minutes. Even with no passengers and no ordinary delay, the road refused the 12-minute fiction. The senior trustee looked toward Reginald. One lawful coach could not have made both entries. Then the records are mistaken, Reginald replied, or the witnesses have agreed upon a story. The witnesses have not yet given the whole of it, Alice said. Mr. Pullen entered beside the magistrate. His preliminary statement had remained sealed. He stood without a hat, pale but steady. I ordered the swallow die from Mr. Bell, he said. I was instructed to request west-facing trial pieces and a duplicate board in Marden colours. The sign-arm was to be turned before the Woldham coach reached the fork. A worn relay pair was assigned, so the failure would appear to come from Mrs. Corbett's planning. Reginald did not move. You acted for your own gain. No, my lord. I acted because I was told refusal would end my employment. Mr. Sayer placed the folded yard instruction slip before the magistrate. Its outer fold bore the initials R.B. and the date 4 days before the launch. The magistrate broke the plain wafer. The written order directed the lower relay yard to prepare west-facing trial pieces, preserve the coach number, and fit the Marden board after the first gate. The initials R.B. appeared beneath the instruction. Reginald's face hardened. Initials can be imitated. The crossed S account mark can also be imitated, the magistrate said. So can paint, bolts, timing records, a die defect, and a foreman's memory. The question is whether all were imitated independently for the same purpose. Araminta stepped forward before her father could answer. Pullen is lying about the horses. The Warn Bay pair was never meant to take the quarry lane. The words fell into a silence so complete that the distant Bridgewater could be heard. Alice turned toward her. How did you know which pair was assigned? Araminta's colour vanished. Everyone knew the relay teams. No, Pullen said. The Bay pair was chosen after dark. Only the yard office, Lord Satterley, Lady Araminta, and I knew. Reginald's voice cut across the yard. Be silent. The magistrate looked at Araminta. Did you know the board would be changed? She gripped her gloves. I knew Marden colours would be used. I approved the handbills. I was told the coach would be delayed and Mrs. Corbett's contract would fail. I did not believe Lady Mary would be seriously harmed. You knew the road identity would be falsified, the magistrate said. Araminta looked toward Thomas, perhaps expecting protection for the sake of his house. He did not move from the place Alice had assigned him. The trustees withdrew only long enough to review the trust records and the minutes already taken. Their decision was administrative, not criminal. Reginald was removed as chairman of the local turnpike trust by recorded vote. Satterley operational control over the Woldham route was ended. Toll and maintenance accounts would undergo independent examination. Future route decisions would require multiple trustees rather than one chairman's authority. Marden Posting House was restored to full eligibility for lawful contracts. The magistrate accepted custody of both Woldham counterfeit discs, the 3 ghost coach discs, Bell's Die and Order, the accident panel and route board, the ghost coach board, the duplicate cash box, Mrs. Cole's slate, Pullen's statement, and the RB initialed instruction slip. No one declared Reginald criminally convicted. No one pretended his title had disappeared. The law would proceed by evidence rather than applause. When the clerk finished reading the trust vote, Thomas stepped into the open ground before the same people who had heard Alice accused. He faced them, not her. Mrs. Corbett warned us before the coach left Woldham. I believed her while belief cost my house only delay. After my sister was injured, I chose speed, certainty, and appearance. I withdrew Mrs. Corbett's authority before the evidence had been independently examined. My rank increased the harm. It did not lessen my responsibility. No plea entered his voice. I will not remain sole patron of the reorganized route. No operator's livelihood or safety judgment should depend upon one duke's confidence, including mine. He stepped back without speaking of love, courtship, or forgiveness. Alice crossed the space because she chose to. I accept the correction, she said. You may court me, Your Grace, if you still wish to do so under the terms we have already set. Something quiet and unguarded moved across his face. I do. Alice offered her hand. Thomas looked at it before taking it gently. He did not draw her closer. Behind them, the restored signarm pointed toward the lawful road. Before them stood the trustees, the carriers, the servants, and the county witnesses who had once mistaken Alice's competence for presumption. Her name had not been cleared by a duke's declaration. It had been cleared by metal, distance, time, voluntary witnesses, and her refusal to let another powerless person carry the guilt meant for her. On April 17th, 1819, nearly 6 months after the road trial at Gorsamere, Alice sat in the route room at Marden Posting House with 2 marriage settlements before her, and no intention of signing either until every line meant what it claimed. Mr. Owen Sayer occupied one end of the table. At the other sat Mr. Hale, the independent solicitor Alice had chosen because he owed neither Woldham nor Marden a favour. Thomas stood near the window, not beside the papers. The first settlement vested Marden Posting House, Marden Cottage, and the business income in 2 named trustees for Alice's separate use. The second confirmed that management of routes, employees, contracts, closures, and safety rules would remain hers after marriage. Thomas would gain no private right to remove a trustee, direct a coach, or overrule a closure because he carried a ducal title. "You've read the provisions 3 times, Mr. Hale said. "I've lived 4 years as a widow," Alice replied. "I know how quickly sympathy becomes authority when ink is vague." Thomas did not object. He had argued only once, weeks earlier, over a clause requiring any future route dispute between Woldham and Marden to be placed before 3 trustees rather than settled by him. Alice had asked whether he objected to the trustees or to not having the final word. He had considered the question, then asked Mr. Hale to strengthen the clause. Now he watched Alice sign, without touching the chair at her side. The examination of Satterley's toll accounts had found diverted income hidden beneath private yard charges and false maintenance costs. Reginald Breton remained Earl of Satterley, but he no longer chaired the Turnpike Trust, controlled the Woldham route, or commanded unquestioned credit among carriers who had once feared losing his gates. The magistrate's inquiry had not yet concluded every legal claim, and no one pretended a peerage vanished because evidence had made it ashamed. Mr. Pullen had answered for his part without receiving Woldham employment. Josiah Bell's unpaid guinea had been recovered through the audited yard account, not Thomas's purse. Mrs. Cole now lived in 2 rooms near the Marden yard and kept passage times with such precision that drivers corrected their own watches before approaching her desk. Lady Araminta had not been sentenced by trustees or magistrate. County patronesses withdrew their invitations after her knowledge became public, and a widowed aunt took her to Bath before Christmas. The difference mattered to Alice. Official authority had limits. Social consequence had another source. When Alice finished the final signature, Mr. Hale sanded the ink. Thomas waited until both solicitors had witnessed the page before he came nearer. "Do the terms satisfy you?" he asked. "They protect the business." "That wasn't what I asked." Alice looked up. "They satisfy me because you didn't ask me to make them smaller." A quiet warmth entered his face. "I've learned that asking for less of your freedom isn't the same as giving more of myself." She closed the settlement. "You've learned to argue better." "I was hoping for praise. You may earn some after another winter." He smiled, and the root room felt briefly lighter than law. The months since October had tested more than promises. During January, freezing rain had silvered the Weston's descent and threatened a contracted mail departure. Thomas had proposed an additional escort and fresh teams so the schedule might be preserved. Alice had refused to release the coach. Their disagreement lasted long enough for Mrs. Cole to carry away 2 untouched cups of tea. At last, Thomas had looked through the office window at the ice whitening the road. "It's your closure," he said. "I don't like it, but I won't overrule it." By morning, a carrier's cart had slid into the hedge along the same descent. Thomas never mentioned the accident as proof of virtue. He simply stopped treating Alice's caution as a request for permission. That conduct, repeated when no audience watched, mattered more than his public apology at Gorsamere. 1 week after the settlement was signed, on April 24th, bells carried across the Hampshire fields as Alice entered Marden Parish Church. The ceremony was proper, intimate, and crowded beyond expectation. Lady Mary stood beside Mrs. Baird, her cane no longer needed, though damp weather still troubled her right ankle. Mr. Sayer witnessed the register. Mrs. Cole wore a blue bonnet and wept without apology. Coachmen, ostlers, widows from the parish, neighbouring proprietors, and several county families filled the pews in no useful order of rank. Thomas wore no military decoration. Alice wore pearl grey silk with narrow silver trim and carried no symbol of rescue. When the clergyman named her wife, she became Her Grace Alice Brackenbury, Duchess of Woldham. When she signed the register, she did so with a steady hand and no sense that Marden had been swallowed by the new name. By evening, the wedding supper had ended, and the first spring night coach stood ready beneath the yard lamps. Its black root board carried cream lettering fixed to marked bolts. Mrs. Cole checked the posted time. 2 witnesses watched the lawful token issued. Passengers settled beneath travelling rugs, while the guard inspected the lamp brackets and brake chain. The safety rules Alice had designed were no longer evidence in a scandal. They had become ordinary practice. In the root room above the yard, Alice opened her father's brass map dividers. The repaired hinge caught the lamplight, darker than the surrounding metal but firm. She placed one point upon Woldham Park and the other upon Marden. Between them ran the road that had carried accusation, rain, danger, and a duke riding through the night. Now it carried passengers, letters, wages, and choices made under rules no single title could bend. Thomas came to stand beside her. He did not move the instrument. "Which is home?" he asked. Alice considered the 2 points. Woldham held his family, duty, and history. Marden held her work, independence, and the life she had built before becoming a duchess. Marriage had joined the road. It had not erased either destination. "Neither, if one is a command," she said. "Both, if the road remains open." Thomas's expression softened. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life asking before I close a gate. You'll occasionally forget, probably, and I'll remind you." "Certainly." A horn sounded below. The guard called the final minute before departure. Thomas looked at Alice rather than the window. "I love you." The words no longer carried fear of losing her. They held winter arguments, signed limits, repaired trust, and the humility of change practiced in ordinary rooms. Alice placed her hand in his. "I love you too." She drew him nearer and kissed him before he could ask. Surprise warmed into tenderness. His hand settled at her waist, and he answered only the affection she offered. When they parted, she remained within his arms. "Was that permission?" he murmured. "That was initiative. I stand corrected." A familiar position. He laughed softly and drew her into a full embrace. Alice held him with equal strength. Then they went down to the yard, still holding hands. The genuine number 12 slid cleanly into the rack, its swallow facing east. The gates opened. Hooves struck the road in an even rhythm, and the coach lamps moved beyond Marden into the mild April darkness. Behind them, the brass dividers remained open upon the map, one point at Woldham and one at Marden, measuring not the distance that separated their homes, but the road they had chosen to keep between them.